Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. 14 decades ago, commercial electricity did not exist. Candles, oil lamps, and gas lamps were used to light the night. Then, in 1878, Thomas Edison formed the Edison Electric Light Company in New York City with money from several private financiers, including J.P. Morgan and the members of the Vanderbilt family. Edison made the first public demonstration of an incandescent light bulb on December 31st, 1879. The ability to generate and transmit electricity on a continuous basis came next. Appliances that could be plugged into the stream of generated electricity followed. Radio, television, and computers were invented, giving humanity the ability to communicate with everyone instantaneously. Our guest today is Warren Wood. He is here to discuss what it takes to maintain and expand the electric infrastructure which provides us with the means to have a modern world. Mr. Wood is Ameren, Missouri's Vice President over External Affairs and Communication. He oversees state legislative and regulatory policy, development, stakeholder relations, and communications for Ameren. Warren Wood, welcome to Conversation.
Thank you, Lee.
What's a stakeholder?
It's anybody with interest in a particular topic. For instance, when we talk about coal-fired generation, the stakeholders will be our customers, and they're worried about the cost of electricity, the environmental community, and the emissions, and different state government agencies that have regulatory authority over the different aspects of that plant.
Okay, good answer. From the description of who you are with the company, it sounds like you're a media guy, but actually you're an engineer, aren't you? Why don't you talk a little bit about who you are and what your background is so that people know before we get started that you know what you're talking about.
I'm an engineer with a background at Mizzou, graduated there in 1987. Went to work for Black & Veatch after that. It's a large power engineering firm located at Orland Park, Kansas. Moved about 13 times in 11 years all over the country, some overseas projects that we worked on relative to energy regulation, generation, and delivery. My background is almost entirely in energy, in either the production, transmission, distribution, or regulation of electricity.
Energy,
electricity in particular,
right,
yes.
Not like gas and
et
cetera.
True.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, when I ask the question, what does it take in order to make sure that the lights right here in this studio and the televisions that are on and the cameras that are on continuously work where there's no hiccups, because it only takes a momentary break in the current flow in order to disrupt everything. What does it take in order to make that happen all across Missouri and Illinois?
If you look back through time and look at the development of the grid, what we now depend on, and
it's only 14 decades.
I
found that when I looked that up. That seems pretty incredible. 14 decades ago, no electricity, and now here we are. Go ahead.
So one of the challenges with electricity is you really have very little storage capability. You know, with natural gas or gasoline, so many other commodities, you have the ability to store it over a period of time. You look at your expectations for load. And if there's changes in load that vary significantly from an expectation, you have a storage capability to deal with that.
Now you just use a technical term, load. What do you mean by that?
It's the amount of electricity being used at any point in time on the electricity system.
Okay.
You know,
so when you have expectations of variations in the amount, like for example, if it's a super cold day or a super hot day, right?
Yeah, what we would call a peak load period. You know, a period where you're utilizing all of the different generation resources. But you had an excellent question. What does it take to deliver reliable electricity? There's kind of three major aspects of it. First, there's the generating units, and we have what I'll call a base load unit. Those are large, generally like coal or nuclear, and these are large base load units that you generally operate all the time. So it's at the base of your load curve. You're always going to operate. It's a low cost, reliable
flowing out
source.
of these things all the time, same amount of electricity.
Then you've kind of got your intermediate units that operate most of the time, but not all the time. And then you have your peaking units that just serve peak periods, but don't operate the rest of the time. And this is all an outgrowth of the fact that you really can't store electricity in any large percentage. So you have to have all these generation units you can bring up and down to serve load variations minute to minute through the day, hour to hour, day to day, week to week, year to year, and on into the future. So you have all the generating capacity you need. And then you have a transmission system where you take it at a relatively high voltage and distribute it to the areas where customers are going to use it. And then you break it down in a substation into a distribution system and then bring it down to lower voltage and bring it to all the individual customers. And all of that needs to be designed to serve a wide variation in load from the middle of the night and a mild fall evening when there's very little load to a period when it's 110 degrees and everybody has air conditioners running.
Mm-hmm. Now, all this equipment that you have in order to go all the way from generation to delivery to the meter at people's homes,
yep.
That costs a lot, doesn't it?
The current rate-based value of the Ameren, Missouri system, where I work, is a little over $7 billion right now. And
wait, you use technical terms on it again. What do you mean by the rate-based?
Oh,
what
it's
is
the total value of the generation plant, transmission, distribution, the buildings, all of the infrastructure necessary to serve our customers in Missouri has a current value of a little over $7 billion.
Right.
And we spend anywhere from $600 to $700 million every year to upgrade and maintain that infrastructure just for our customers in Missouri.
Now, some people, I've talked to them, so I know. Mm-hmm. MoDOT builds a road,
right,
and then they think, oh, well, it's built.
Yeah.
They forget the part about it has to be maintained on a regular basis. You're
Yes.
saying that the electric infrastructure, once built, doesn't just go from there.
No, you have to continue to maintain
What
it.
is it that you're maintaining? What is it? Why doesn't it last forever once you've built it?
Well, those generation plants, say a coal-fired unit, for instance, you go into operation. Many of our units in the state of Missouri average over 45 years of age now. They were originally designed with 40, 45, 50 years of expected life, and most units are retired after that. We don't see the ability to retire those and replace those units, so we're going to operate those as long as we can cost effectively do so. You have to replace burners. You've got the whole boiler inside the coal-fired unit is built up of all these pipes, and they have hot water that boils to steam inside of them, and they erode over time. They develop ruptures, and you have to go in and weld them back in. You have a lot of different pumps, a lot of different piping, a lot of different equipment in there that needs to be monitored and replaced before it fails wherever possible to the degree you can identify it before something fails. Mm-hmm. And then on the transmission system, you've got the poles and wires, and they age. And the distribution system, you've got wooden poles, and a lot of people don't know until they see it go through their neighborhood is you have all these trees around all these wires. You have to trim those on a regular basis, or you're going to see failures from limbs falling on wires.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what is it when I get my electric bill mm-hmm. from Ameren, and then I send in, well, we used to mail it in, now I guess
right.
it goes digitally to you somehow.
Right.
There's magic. Electricity too.
Yes.
But okay, so you get paid, and you're getting paid by all these millions of customers.
Right.
What's their money doing? I mean, is it just going right straight into the pocket of the CEO?
No.
Which is what some people seem to think. Explain what the money that gets spent by homeowners, or I mean, electric users gets spent on.
Well, it goes to pay for fuel. It goes to pay for different environmental upgrades. It goes to build, like our most recent rate case probably gives a good example of where those dollars go. We've built the largest solar energy system in the state of Missouri under an investor utility ownership out in O'Fallon. Went into operation last December. That was about $17 million. We also paid out in the last 2 years almost $100 million in solar rebates for customers to build their own solar systems. And then we spent $185 million for new environmental controls at the Labadie Energy Center, built $145 million new reactor vessel head at the Callaway Energy Center. And so those are the kind of places those investments are going. And they also go to pay for fuel, which is obviously necessary to generate the electricity.
What sort of fuels are used by Ameren to generate electricity?
Coal is about 75% of the electric generating total energy. Mm-hmm. Nuclear power is 19 to 20%, and it varies somewhat depending on if the year has a refuel outage or not built into it. And then there's some natural gas, and then the remaining balances with renewables, including hydroelectric.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Are you in the hydroelectric business, Ameren?
Yes, yes. We operate everybody knows Lake of the Ozarks. Well, Bagnell Dam there is a hydroelectric facility that serves our customers, and Keokuk, which is up northeast of here, and it's a Mississippi run-of-river hydroelectric. It actually went into service in 1913.
Do these hydroelectric generating facilities create much electricity by comparison to the rest of your system?
It's a relatively small percentage on the system overall, but it's interesting if you look at renewable energy resources nationally and you look at hydroelectric and you look at wind and solar and these other resources, hydroelectric is most of the balance of the United States renewable energy mix.
And has been since the 1930s.
Oh yeah, yeah, by far.
Okay, well we can talk about renewables in just a little bit. So let's move back to coal.
Right.
When you go to meetings with the public, what do they have to say about coal?
It's interesting. There's two groups I hear from mostly. On one side, I hear the customers who are concerned about emissions. They hear about, Sierra Club makes some statements about SO2 or NOx emissions and the need to reduce emissions. And I talk about all the different projects we have and how we've reduced our emissions to more than 75% below EPA limits, and that we have these plans for going to a cleaner and more diverse mix of energy resources, and the announcement of the retirement of our Merrimack Energy Center, our Sioux Energy Center, so we're announced closure about a third of our coal-fired units. And then we're building more renewable energy resource. That's one group I hear from, sort of the environmental renewable community. And then I hear from many of our other customers who are very concerned about increases in cost. They're like, well, what are you doing to keep costs down? And one of the things we're doing is keeping these low-cost, reliable sources of energy operating as long as we can cost-effectively do so to minimize rate increases on our customers, especially those customers that have low and fixed incomes.
What is a kilowatt per hour?
It's if you have a 1,000-watt hair dryer and you turn it on, run it for an hour, you've consumed 1 kilowatt hour of electricity.
Okay, now, and that costs a certain amount of cents per kilowatt hour, right?
Right.
Okay. So in your coal-fired plants, what would you say the average cost per kilowatt hour is?
If you look at our existing coal-fired generating units, those are the lowest cost sources of electricity on our system, other than hydro and nuclear are very low variable cost. It's basically what is the cost to run it for an hour? What's that defined cost? The existing coal-fired units we have are a couple of cents, 3 to 4 cents per kilowatt hour.
Per kilowatt hour.
Mm-hmm.
On these new things that you're building, you mentioned O'Fallon, that you have just built a solar demonstration plant, right?
Yes.
What's the cost per kilowatt hour of that?
Delivered cost over 15 cents a kilowatt hour over the expected life of the project.
So something on the order of 5 to 7 times more.
It is more expensive it's certainly more expensive than our existing generation resources.
And some people are demanding that you give up coal and go into these newer technologies.
Yes.
And then you have other people at meetings who are literally screaming at you about the increase in cost.
Yes.
Do they understand that giving up the one means paying more for the other?
I'm not sure they often do. It's one of the reasons that when we have these public hearings,
That's where I first saw you. That's where this whole conversation began. You in Ameren, Missouri, were going through a series of meet and greets with the public.
Right.
What was the purpose of this?
The purpose of the public meetings, we've asked for a rate increase, filed it in July of last year, and when the Public Service Commission conducts these proceedings, they will schedule public hearings around the state to hear from customers on their concerns about increases in cost, hear if there's been any operational issues, have they received their service in an acceptable manner, did they have reliability issues, things like that. And so in these public hearings, we will start the public hearing off by talking about, well, what were the drivers that caused this rate request, and what sort of values are we delivering to customers as a result of these investments. So that's what results in these public meetings.
Well, I sat in on meeting number 1,
yes.
which occurred in Sunset Hills, Missouri, at the Holiday Inn. And I didn't hear, well, no, let me rephrase that. What I heard was a lot of yelling. There were a lot of people who were upset that they thought that Ameren was somehow conniving to take more money out of their pockets, and they were conniving in order to help certain private businesses and or enrich executives of the company. But they didn't seem to want to know about how the electric system worked or what it was that, how the costs were initiated to actually run the system. That I didn't hear. Do you find when you're talking to the public that they are generally aware or unaware of the how electricity comes from generation to run their television?
You know, when you come to these public hearings, what sometimes happens is different stakeholders in the regulatory process, like the Fair Energy Rate Action Fund. They'll send a flyer out to their membership, and they'll object to one particular aspect or another for whatever reason to bring people to the public hearing to be unhappy about that issue. And when people come to the public hearing, we have an opportunity to talk to them about the issue that they've been told about from one stakeholder that had one particular perspective, and try to talk about the broader perspective. You know, you look at our rate cases, those public hearings, we just had 12 public hearings around the state, about 650 attendees in total, and we serve about 3 million Missourians. And so it's a relatively small percentage, but it's a percentage we want to hear from and have an opportunity to talk about their concerns. You know, I don't mind somebody coming to those public hearings upset. I hope they have an opportunity to hear some exchange on what they're thinking and why, and then hear some other things maybe they hadn't heard, and hopefully leave with a better understanding of why the electric rates are going up.
Now, coming back to something you said earlier, you're taking coal-fired plants off.
Yes.
Now, why are we taking coal-fired plants that are currently, are they just worn out?
Yeah, they're reaching their end of
so
useful life.
you really can't use them anymore.
Yeah.
Because some people have asked the question, how much of the EPA regulation on carbon dioxide is affecting Ameren and causing you to junk some of your current facilities in order to build higher priced electric generation capacity?
Right, right. In terms of the coal-fired units are retiring, the one that we've announced for closure is the Merrimack Energy Center. That unit will be 60 plus years old in 2022, actually about 69 years old when we retire it in 2022. Most of the coal-fired units are retired by the time they're age 60. And really it's a testament to the group that's been running and maintaining the plant that we're able to run it out to 2022. That's not being closed because of the pending Clean Power Plan or CO2 regulations. It's other EPA regulations that are going to go into effect at about that time.
What sort of regulations
It's
are
the
those?
mercury air toxic standards and the cross-state air pollution rule. So there's other EPA regulations before even the Clean Power Plan, and the fact that the unit's approaching 69 years of age in 2022, that you look at it and the retrofits to comply with these new regulations, along with some of its inherent inefficiencies in the older technology in the plant, you've reached a point you really just need to retire the unit.
Okay. You and I had a telephone conversation, a long one, when we were talking about your coming and appearing here. One of the things that I told you was that I'm old enough to remember before and after the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts of 1970. I also said that I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. We went to Steubenville, Ohio one time, where there was considerable coal burning going on there, I believe for steel production. And every house had like this much soot on the roof, right? Now that's before the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. Lake Erie was supposedly dead. It had been aged 100,000 years in a matter of a couple of decades. Clean Water, Clean Air Act come suddenly. Ohio, Northeast Ohio, is a whole lot cleaner than it had been. So it cost, I don't know how many billions of dollars to clean up the United States and meet the regulations of this new Clean Air and Clean Water Acts. But, you know, we probably went from 100% down to 10% of what was going on, and it cost a certain number of billions. We seem to be working on just that last little 10%, and it seems like it's costing at least as much as the first 90, if not more. Is that, am I Am I seeing that correctly, or am I mistaken?
No, I would say that's generally true. If
Okay.
you look back at when the coal-fired units initially went into operation in the United States, and you look at the environmental controls at the time, and then you look at things like switching coal to go to coal that had better emissions characteristics, or lower emissions, I should say. And then you look at the different retrofits to the unit to get, and some of it was in the original construction of the unit. There's a certain cost that went into removal of about 90% of the different emissions. And then you look at the costs that are going into getting after those last couple of percentage points, and it's very high. I mean, on our system alone, since 2007.
But what's the value to society of this last little bit, considering we've already done 90% of the work?
That's a question.
That's a political question. I understand that.
I understand, yeah.
But you're sort of in a political business. You're the legislative guy that's got to go down to Jefferson City and make the point.
When you look at the Environmental Protection Agency regulations and what's driving those from different, I talked about stakeholder groups, the people concerned about their incomes, people concerned with the environmental emissions, and the renewable community. There's a lot of different stakeholders working on and pushing through the courts and through policy and through elected official positions how the Environmental Protection Agency should regulate the emissions from any number of different types of generating plants, especially coal-fired generating units. And so they put those regulations in place, and we end up having to comply with them. So are you getting, you're obviously getting a lot less reductions in emissions per dollar spent on that last percent than you did on the first percent. I don't know how to answer the question. Are you getting the value for the dollars you're putting into those projects?
Well, it's all very well and good to have special interest groups come up and convince the EPA or the state of Missouri to put on extra regulations, but the people who are living on fixed incomes, who suddenly show up at your meetings telling you that they can't afford another $10 a month or $20 a month in electric costs, which may actually be even more if you're going from 2 cents a kilowatt hour to 15 cents a kilowatt hour. There seems to be some disconnect when you're only talking about now you mentioned mercury, okay? Are we talking about significant amounts of mercury which are actually going to cause brain damage? Or are we talking about minimal amounts of mercury that somebody said, well, we just can't even have that?
We're talking very, very small amounts of mercury. And I tell you, one of the things that concerns me about is the investment levels we make to bring our generation units up to these last small percentages. And what are we doing globally to accomplish the same reductions from other emitters? I was looking at some studies that were indicating that something on the order of 30% of mercury on U.S. soil now is from Chinese coal-fired power plants. And when you look at how much we spend to make these last small reductions in emissions, and then you look at other generators around the world and what they're emitting, and how's it affecting the cost of our electricity from a competitive perspective to the cost of their electricity, and what are they doing to reduce their emissions? Are they putting themselves through the same efforts to reduce emissions that we are? So there's a whole question of competitiveness there.
Yes. We had about 5 minutes left, and we were also going to discuss regulation versus deregulation. The state of Illinois, they have, quote, a deregulated electric environment.
Right.
Explain what that means.
Very good. Good question. Back in about 1997, there was a trend that went toward deregulation of electric service providers. And let me describe what that means. Vertically integrated utilities before 1997, and even now in the quote-unquote regulated states, the generation units, the transmission, the distribution, all the way to the customers, operated, controlled by one electric service provider.
Pause there for just a second.
Yes.
Make sure people understand this. There's 3 phases of electricity.
Yes.
There's the people who actually generate, or there's the machines that generate electricity.
Yep.
Then there's those big towers with all those wires, transmission.
Yes.
That's a whole separate idea, or a separate company now, right? And then you have, at the end, where you see the wires coming to your house.
Yes.
Distribution.
Yes.
Okay. So
now,
there's 3 parts.
And generally, under a vertically integrated or regulated utility, that's all. You have one operator, one group that's responsible for, or one company that's responsible, such as Ameren, Missouri, to the customers that we serve. In states that have deregulated or restructured or gone to retail open access like Illinois, what you've done is you've taken the generators away from that regulated entity. You've basically left a wires company that takes the electricity from generators and delivers it to customers, but it no longer owns and operates and controls the electric generators. Is that clear?
Yes.
So basically you've separated out, and then customers have the choice, well, I can stay with my incumbent electric service provider, or I can choose electricity from other providers. And that's something that has happened here. It has a couple of other implications I'd like to talk about if you had a minute.
But the kilowatt hour that people are paying, we've only got 3 minutes left, so we got to get to this, has to do also with the long transmission and the distribution.
Yes.
And that's fixed, so that all they're getting is just a little bit lower rate if they go with XYZ electric generator versus Ameren's generator versus ABC generator. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
And what has Illinois found as a result of this, allowing people to choose the company that's generating electricity and pay them?
Well, among the states that have deregulated, there are about 17 states. A couple have now repealed and gone back to a regulated model. Others have not. Illinois has stayed with its regulated model. And Illinois has done very well under that model. It's probably among the very best of all the other states that have deregulated. With the Illinois Power Agency, with their Illinois Commerce Commission, and then a couple years ago there was the Municipal Aggregation Act that brought some of those benefits down to residential and small commercial customers. If you look at the electric rates among deregulated states, Illinois has among the very best. But if you look at, I looked at 2014 Department of Energy Information Administration, Department of Energy Information Administration. It's all data on electric rates for states. In 2014, Illinois' rate was about 9.24 cents a kilowatt hour. Ameren, or not Ameren, Missouri's average electric rate was about 8.47 cents per kilowatt hour.
So it's still cheaper in the regulated state of Missouri.
On a total
per
state
household.
basis.
We're talking about per household.
Yeah,
so you're talking about people Alton, Edwardsville, Belleville, on average, are paying slightly more than people, say, in Florissant, U-City, Arnold.
Now, I should clarify, those are total state average numbers. Ameren, Illinois' numbers are well below the Illinois average, and Ameren, Missouri's numbers are well below the Missouri average. But then if you look at that delivered total cost of electricity, Ameren, Illinois customers are a little bit less than Ameren, Missouri right now.
The reason I ask these questions is because there was a gentleman at the meeting that who made it sound like Illinois customers were doing so much better under a deregulated environment than the Ameren, Missouri customers.
Right.
And you've just said that, in fact, it's comparable.
It's very close.
It's very
and historically, it's been the other way.
Well, we've covered a lot of territory.
Yeah.
We have to have you back, and we'll go through this conversation a little bit more. We missed out on talking about nuke, and I wanted to do that. So thank you very much for being with us. Then speaking with Warren Wood. He is a vice president with Ameren, Missouri. Had a very interesting discussion about electric infrastructure, something that actually you need to understand. We're going to upload this discussion to YouTube. Just go look up Conversation with Lee Presser, Warren Wood. You can show it to your friends or look at it again. Thank you very much. See you next time.